I think there's two things, right? He was the man of the people, and he was a hell of a fighter. And I know he said in that Darren one, one of Britain's finest, and he's definitely one of those.
In a matter of moments, we're going to have Tris Dixon, tremendous boxing scribe, boxing journalist, longtime boxing journalist, currently at Boxing Scene, has been a member of the Boxing Beat for many, many years, the editor of Boxing News back in the day, which is a very, very, very prestigious boxing outlet, and has also written for The Ring Magazine and The Telegraph and many more, and has written several books, including Damage, The Untold Story of Brain Trauma in Boxing, Warrior, A Life of War, Boxing and Redemption, The Road to Nowhere in the Company of Kings, and most importantly for these purposes, Ricky Hatton, War and Peace, which came out in 2013. Someone who has covered Ricky Hatton for the vast majority of his career and then wrote this book with Ricky Hatton about 12 or so years ago. Wanted to have him on to talk about the one and only Ricky the Hitman Hatton. He's kind enough to join us on this Monday afternoon. Hello, Tris. How are you? I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm sorry that it's under these circumstances, but we thought no better person than you to eulogize and remember Ricky Hatton. So thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ariel. It's been a tough 36 hours, and not just for me, but my heart goes out obviously to his family, his close friends, and I think of his son Campbell. I think of his brother Matthew, and all the guys that came through with him, like friends of his for 30 years, people like Matthew Macklin, Paul Smith, um, Anthony Farnell. There was a whole crop of guys from Manchester and Liverpool who came through at the same time, and they were all great friends together. Like they've been close to Ricky for 30, 35 years, and yeah, I mean, British boxing on the whole is absolutely reeling. I've never seen. It's hard to think of the public outpouring of grief that matches this.
And could I ask on a personal note, how are you dealing with it? Because correct me if I'm wrong, not only did you cover his legendary career, Hall of Fame career, but I do believe you were friends. He was a good friend of yours, and you wrote this book, and I saw the beautiful message that he wrote to you in the book as well, which I thought like it just screamed Ricky Hatton because he was thanking you for just being a good friend. How are you dealing with everything over the past 36 hours?
Yeah, not good at all. Not good at all. I think I cried for like 8 or 9 hours yesterday, and I'm not like not trying to be a man's man, but I'm not a crier. But it's funny, I spoke to, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, Jamie Moore. I've spoken to all those guys today, and they're all the same. Like no one can stop, and messages. Oh God, we get messages on Instagram. We never met him. And stop crying, and they didn't even know him. And it's touched so many people, and I just it's completely blindsided me. Not just losing him, but the emotion. Like I just don't even know where it's coming from, but it just seems to be getting everybody.
Well, I think I kind of know where it's coming from. He meant so much to so many people, and he connected with so many people on a personal level because what has always been said about him was he was the everyman. He represented the UK so brilliantly. He never put himself above anyone. Those stories of him at the pub, hanging out with people at the local, as you would say, and just being one of the lads, made him almost feel like your best friend, but also someone that was doing superhuman things on a superhuman level. And so, can I ask, in your words, because they're much more impactful than mine, why did the UK and why did the boxing public adore this man so much? Why did he seem to connect in a way very few star athletes are able to?
Because he had time for everybody. He made time for everybody. Even just looking through social media, everyone's got pictures of him. And countless pictures of him. There's slides. People who, are cursory cast members in his life have got 10, 15 pictures with him. You go through social media, and everyone did like, and it was known that he would obviously blow up between fights in terms of weight and stuff. And he was going down the pub and drinking with everybody. And after the fights, he'd meet guys in the pub and see all his friends and family, and he's just so accessible. And I think that's the thing. When we started to write the book, Ricky wanted to be really really involved with it. It wasn't where you get a 3 or 4 hour interview, and then the rest of it's cuttings. Like me and Ricky we were basically spending every other week together. So, but for about 6 months, I was going through a divorce at the time, so I was going up there like on the weekends when I didn't have my kids. I'd go off and see Ricky, and we'd sort of sit and do a long session on a Saturday, maybe break for lunch, and then I'd go back to crash, and then we'd reconvene and do a session on a Sunday, and then we go out to lunch 9 times out of 10, and I live a long way from Ricky, but when he was doing speaking engagements down in this neck of the woods, we'd meet up. And where I'm going with this is wherever we're sat, obviously in a public place, like queues forming to see him because he was so recognizable, his voice, his look, everything about him, and this goes back to what we're talking about in terms of his popularity. He had time for everyone, and we'd be sat there, or he'd be, people would just queue up to take pictures with him and do selfies and have things signed, and he just made time for everybody. And you could tell, like, sometimes it's like having his head down. It's like it's not going to happen, is it? And next thing you know, one person's seen him, everybody's seen him, and all hell's breaking loose. And he entertained everybody and did his thing, and he was just so, that sort of speaks to what we were talking about earlier, in the sense that that's what he was like.
That process of writing the book with him, because he's very open, raw, honest. I've only interviewed him once, and I was blown away afterwards at how open he was about everything he had been through, and that was in a 25-minute conversation. To get that firsthand, and this is his book, this will be the definitive life story, and now is, to hear the things that he was going through, battling, having to overcome. What was that like for you as the writer?
Two things. One is it was obviously deeply sad, and the other thing is just I was also deeply privileged. The fact that he would confide in me and select me to do the job. Um, so yeah, I mean it was like that really, Ariel. It was like just torn, just so privileged to build that relationship with him over the years, to the point he's like, yeah, you're the guy, you're going to do it, and then but to hear the real stuff, because the book was, that's the paperback edition that I've got behind me that you showed on the one with the gold cover with that brilliant Castillo knockout finish there. Like that's all his words. Like it's all first person, and it is an autobiography. Like it's not a cuttings book. It's Ricky, and in fact, that was one of the things that Ricky always said to me. Um, People would always go up to him and this is just, trust me, it's not a sales pitch, but say like, I could hear your voice in the book, and I'm like, it is his voice. That's what it was like. And so those were the conversations that we had. It was very thorough and very personal, and it was his story, and he was proud of it. Hence that note that he wrote, thanks for writing a good book, and or whatever he called it. It was Ricky, and I hope you do hear his voice, because yeah, I mean, such a wonderful book. Yeah, it kind of takes your breath away.
When was the last time you spoke to him, Tris?
Well, we would swap messages pretty regularly. It's like it was about a month ago when we swapped some messages. He'd announced this come back in Dubai. We swapped some messages then, and then like randomly, I would just check in on him, uh, and yeah, and so it was about a month ago. I think he's been to Tenerife on holiday since, and but we would always check in. And you know what, like, because obviously when you lose someone like this, you scroll through your messages and you look, and some of the stuff that he would send, it was like, he always asked how you're doing, and he always say like, oh, I've seen you doing such and such on Instagram, like looking good, or like how, and he'd always ask after you. Like it was always very two-way. Do you know what I mean? It was never like me asking him, picking his brains and just saying it. Like he'd always fire back like, how are you doing? Hope you're well. Like every time, even if I'd message him and Campbell's just had a fight, and I'd say, oh, Campbell looks good, and he'd be like, yeah, Campbell's coming on bit by bit. How are you doing?
Wow.
He'd always fire back, and just going to what we saw yesterday as well, like the grief through the nation was just outstanding. Early on, so I got a text from Brian Peters, Katie Taylor's manager, who said he sent me the link to the Manchester Evening News saying the news, and Ricky's so famous that you think it's one of those fake news things, and I saw it and I thought, you know, I can't believe that's going around. I was driving, so I put the phone down, face down, and then like about 15, 20 seconds later, I was like, oh no, oh no. And then it just sort of hit me. And then I thought, you know what, I'm not gonna look on social media, I'm not gonna go online. And then, a couple of hours later I looked, and then I actually started to take real comfort from the outpouring, and I kind of wished he'd saw it. And then I purposefully tuned into the Manchester City Man United game, where obviously everything came to a standstill in his honor. And he's such a Man City fan, but friends of mine who support Manchester United were there yesterday. One of them said, I'm pleased that they won because it's what Ricky would have wanted.
Mm.
Not sure he quite meant that. But also he said like he'd never felt such a united atmosphere at the derby before. And you saw Pep Guardiola close to tears and everything else. And it's just so hard. It's just it's just wish he knew, and I hope he can see. And then you saw the individual stuff. Like I got such a kick out. Like there was some major A-listers leaving tributes to Ricky, but then you see like his idols like Roberto Duran posted about him on Instagram, and his great friend Marco Antonio Barrera. And I was with them both in Canastota last year when Ricky was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, and they had this sort of brotherhood. And then you saw Ricky's great like favorite footballers and his favorite singer like Liam Gallagher and Vince and company, and all the people that he would have wanted to have been sort of seen, not seen to be, but all the people he was friends with, who he really looked up to and idolized. It meant so much to them. It wasn't just like it wasn't a one-way thing. It wasn't like where Ricky was like a fan of these guys. Like they were a fan of him, and it's just nice to see some of those tributes. And I saw a statement from the family earlier, and they said the same thing. And that's Ricky's home there, the Heartbreak, and that's where we recorded most of the book. Where we spent so much time, and yeah, it's been an incredible outpouring. In fact, I spoke to Lou DiBella a couple of hours ago, and I said, like, can you think of any other human who would do this, like who could take 30,000 fans to Las Vegas, who sort of united everyone, and the only person, and I'm not comparing them as fighters, but the only one that Lou came up with was Muhammad Ali. Like who would take 30,000 fans to the other side of the world to for anything? It's just hard to fathom like how much he was loved.
What was it like being there for that Mayweather fight? The buildup was amazing. The 24/7
You
was.
know what, Ariel, I didn't do that one. So I was the number two at Boxing News at the time. I was in Switzerland covering Wayne Alcock against Arthur Abraham.
Wow.
So yeah, that night I wasn't there. I covered lots of his fights from. I was there in 2000. I think it was like his 16th or 17th fight when he fought on the Mike Tyson undercard against Julius Francis, and then obviously I covered the Sinchenko fight where it was sort of in the dressing room, just me and him after the fight, and that was in the middle of writing the book. And I thought Ricky was going to be really down, and I was like, I remember like he was looking at himself in a picture in the dressing room. Sorry, in a mirror in the dressing room, and he looked at himself and he's like, "Well, no, it's not there anymore." And I was like, "He seems to be taking this well," and he did. Like it at the time, it gave him like closure. He's like, I would have beaten this guy in my prime. I'm not in my prime. There's no point. Like I've got the answers I wanted, and I really felt like there was a period there where he sort of really sort of let go. But I think the thing was he always kept a foot in it. He never fully embraced life after boxing. And I've been thinking about this a lot the last 24 hours or so. You know, we will never understand, obviously, what it's like to walk in Ricky's boots and to have that level of fandom where everyone knows him, everyone wants to be with him, everyone like it's so we've got these superstars in the sport today, but no one is accessible or as relatable as Ricky was. And so, like, he was obviously, when he rode that crest of the wave, real life was a real challenge because it was so different. Whereas I think a lot of fighters keep business and pleasure separate. Ricky's life was, and his identity was being the fighter and being this everyman. And and I think he couldn't shake that identity. He didn't want to shake that identity. Like he wanted to be that guy, but time comes to us all where we have to either change or adapt or reinvent ourselves. And I think I was just thinking about this. Like he trained his fighters. He went into promoting. He's done bits. He's obviously worked with his and helped Campbell. He's working with his, or was working helping his nephew Jack, Matthew's son. And he never got a step out. He was always in it, and I think he always wanted to stay in it. But it's tough. I remember speaking to former world cruiserweight champ Johnny Nelson a few years ago. He said, like, when you retire, you need 5 years out of the gym just to detox, get out your system. And Ricky was never sort of afforded that, and he wouldn't have wanted it. He didn't. He was a boxing guy through and through, and hence I mentioned Duran and Barrera. Like, they were his guys.
If there's someone watching this right now who maybe didn't live through the Ricky Hatton era but wants to try to get a sense for why it was so special, which fight would you recommend they watch from beginning to end, walkouts included? Would it be the Costa fight that everyone speaks so glowingly about? It happened in the middle of the night. It seemed to be his coming out party to the rest of the world. Would that be the one, or would there be another one that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think that was his defining night. You couldn't go with anything but that because it sort of encapsulated everything that he was as a fighter. But if I was saying to go and watch anything, I would probably, and I heard you talking about earlier, go and watch the Hatton Mayweather award-winning 24/7. Like, it's great. It's great viewing, and everything. I watched the Netflix stuff with Crawford and Canelo last week, and I thought it was really good. Like the build up, the two shows they did. I thought that, and it reminded me a bit of the Ricky Mayweather stuff. But when you look at the personalities of Floyd and Ricky, like everything's tried to replicate that, but without those personalities, you're fighting a tough battle to try and make TV as engaging as that.
The closing segment of that final episode is some of the best TV and some of the best fight promotion that I've ever seen. I went and quickly found it on YouTube yesterday, and I think I've watched it 10 times since then because, again, the juxtaposition of their two personalities. But for they were magic together, and by the end, it seemed like there was a genuine mutual respect there. It's brilliant stuff. As of right now, I've been doing the show now for a few hours, so I haven't checked. Do we have a cause of death? Do we know what happened?
It's not been released yet.
Okay.
So, yeah, no, it's not there. I'm sure it'll be out in the next couple of days.
Do you have any idea how he was doing? I saw Darren Barker did a sit down with him just a couple of days ago, and he was talking about this comeback. Do you have any sort of sense as to how he was doing over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I asked Darren because I was with him in Belfast. We were at Crocker Donovan together over the weekend with your man Pizzi. Actually, it was good to see him.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really into stuff. I think Ricky looked in recent stuff like on the heavier side for me, and like I'd be really into stuff. But from what I hear, he was Ricky, and I wasn't necessarily really happy with how he looked, and because I think that his self-worth was sometimes tied into how he looked. But the thing is, Ariel, and this is the thing, and Ricky was such a big advocate for this when it comes to mental health, is it didn't matter what we all saw because he was, I'm loath to use the tears of the clown thing. I'm just trying to think, Ricky was the life and soul of the party. He wouldn't show us anything. It was, he'd go out for meals with us, he'd go out for drinks with his friends, and he'd be around his loved ones. But when the door closed at the heartbreak and it was just him, we don't know how he was and how he felt, and I think that's where he struggled, ironically away from the crowds and on his own.
That is a heartbreaking thought. You've done such a great job of remembering him, but I would urge everyone to go check out the book. I would also urge everyone to check out your podcast, which I had mentioned to PT last week, your conversation with Carl Frampton. I really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed your conversation with Dan Canobio. So I'm a subscriber and listener of the Boxing Life Stories podcast. You do a great job with that as well. And also, of course, on boxingscene.com. Can I ask you in closing, how do you think and how do you want people to remember your friend Ricky Hatton when it's, when we're looking back on him in 10, 15 years? I know he was asked recently by Darren about his legacy, but I'm curious from your perspective, how do you want people to remember the Hitman?
Yeah, I think there's two things, right? He was the man of the people, and he was a hell of a fighter. And I know he said in that Darren one, one of Britain's finest, and he's definitely one of those. And yeah, I mean, his legacy, and I know you've asked me to put it into words, but it really speaks for itself, right?
Mm.
Like, he was just ridiculously popular, hugely adored, and could fight his ass off.
Well said. Thank you, Tris. I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry. It's a immeasurable loss, not just to the boxing community, but to, I know, UK, the whole country. The whole country is grieving right now, and just a great guy who, as you said, despite his trials and tribulations, always did such a great job of trying to advocate for looking after yourself, for mental health awareness, for trying to be the best person that you can be. And in my opinion, he walked the walk and talked the talk. So my condolences to his family and friends such as yourself. I know it's not an easy time. So really, thank you for coming on and talking to us about Ricky Hatton for a few minutes today.
Thanks, Ariel.
There he is. Tris Dixon of boxingscene.com wrote the book on Ricky Hatton, has a great podcast called Boxing Life Stories that I highly recommend you check out as well. Some great conversations with legends of the sport, people who cover the sport, and sort of a refreshing look on the sport of boxing. So do check that out. And later in the program, we will also talk to Eddie Hearn, who did not promote Ricky Hatton. He was a Queensberry guy, but obviously someone who has been a part of the UK boxing scene for a very long time, who I'm sure will have a few thoughts. It's been amazing to see how he has been covered and talked about over the last 36 or so hours. Like, this is, I don't know who I would compare him to who here in the United States. Maybe we could think about a little bit that question, but he was beloved in the UK and in the boxing community. No one said a bad word about Ricky, even his opponents. Thanks for watching this video. Before you go, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for us. Also, give us a thumbs up, leave a nice comment. These things go a long way. And while you're here, do check out the rest of the channel. We've got live shows and full interviews, clips, and a whole lot more. We're doing big things here, and we appreciate your support very much.